Today we are going to hear stories of people who have died for a short time. Someone on Reddit asked, people who have been clinically dead, what did you experience in death, if anything? I coded after surgery. I remember being able to see and hear everything and understand what was happening, but I couldn't physically feel anything. It was deeply unsettling. My heart also stopped after surgery 3 years ago. I only remember them getting me back and drifting between darkness and seeing the nurses panic. Like you mentioned, I felt nothing and was just an impartial observer. The aftermath was the worst. Realizing how close I was to oblivion and recalling the dissociation was horrifying. People often say, "Oh, I'm not worried, she's a fighter," when someone gets very ill. But me? I feel like I was just ready to watch myself fade into the dark, despite being content and having things to live for. Unsettling is exactly the right word. My wife and I discussed this at length. 4 years ago, she died twice in 3 months, needing full resuscitation both times. Both were lengthy rescues. One resuscitation was off and on for nearly 40 minutes. I asked her later when she had recovered, if she remembered anything at all during the times she was clinically dead. She remembered nothing. Blackness. No light. No relatives and former pets waiting for her. Just black. Thankfully, also no pain. See, I don't think I can really post my experience here, because I wasn't deemed clinically dead. But I did get hit by a car once when I was about 13, and I will never forget the experience that came afterwards. I was biking when a lady hit me with her car. I had a moment prior to being hit, where I knew it was going to happen, but it was far too late for me to actually do anything about it. I braced for impact, got hit, and went straight into this state of complete utter silence. I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, no smells, no thoughts, no feelings. I just simply existed in this peaceful black bubble, and it was the most at peace I've ever been in my life. It felt like I had been there for hours honestly, but really it had only been a few seconds before I woke up and everything came back. The loud noises, the pain from being hit, seeing all the cars etc. It's crazy though, it was one of the most amazing feelings I've ever experienced. A friend of mine described death, she was technically dead twice, as being surrounded by darkness and floating with some sort of warm gel-like substance covering her. She never wanted to leave that state. When I was 15 I was scheduled to do a tilt table test. They lean you up at an angle on a table, because I was consistently experiencing dizziness and fainting spells. After about 20 minutes, the doctor tilted the table back and I could feel myself passing out. I got severe tunnel vision and lost like 95% of my eyesight, like looking through a straw, and then I blacked out. I remember hearing the doctor call the code, and my father cursing at the doctor that he killed me. I remember hearing a lot of slamming and banging around, which I assumed was the crash cart and nurses shoving into this small testing room. I felt a pressure on my chest, like when you have someone stand on your back to crack it, which I found out later was the nurses doing CPR. I saw an array of vivid colors kind of dancing around, forming objects in the dark. The scariest thing was how peaceful it felt, just pure 100% peace. No panic, no pain, no sadness, nothing, just bliss. I coded for just under 2 minutes, and as soon as I came to and opened my eyes, I felt seriously angry and hostile. I started ripping off whatever I could get my hands on and yelling at the doctor to get me off the table. Clinically dead on 2 separate occasions. I didn't experience any visions or light, and I didn't feel anything at all. It was like a switch was flipped and my existence was just shut off. Coming back was another story. Slowly I was able to hear the voices of those around me fading in, and they slowly got louder until I was able to open my eyes. That's it. Nothing spectacular. 1 second you're here, 1 second you're not. Not mine, but the head of my program was in a horrible car accident. She was dead for a few minutes on the scene while paramedics worked on her. She said it was the most amazing feeling she's ever experienced. It was blank black nothing, but that was perfectly fine, and she felt a comfort she can't even explain. She remembers being angry at the man working on her when she finally came back to her body because she wanted to stay there. She told us she can't wait to experience it again when it's really her turn. She's not religious in the slightest, and she actively quashes our ghost stories, mortuary students, because she only believes in tangible things, so she fully turned me into a believer. Felt it's important I make a distinction, she was very adamant about, when telling us this story. She's not advocating suicide. She stressed that she isn't telling us she's trying to reach this place again, but that when it was her time she was going to be comfortable embracing it. A friend of mine described it as deeply relaxing and that she could feel herself drifting away, but was brought back just as she was ready to leave. After that, she embraced life and death. She said she doesn't fear death anymore since it was so relaxing to experience. Similar experience here. As you're dying, you start feeling tired in a way you never have before, or will again, until you die. The sheer act of staying alive is exhausting. But then it's all blank until I woke up from a coma a couple weeks later. You don't even remember the actual moment of death, and it takes weeks for your mind to remember everything leading up to it. I was in a ton of pain before and after because a couple of my organs were perforated, but dying itself wasn't painful. I agree that I'm also not afraid of death. Not even just because of the pain factor, but because it feels less unknown to me and there isn't time for regret when it happens. I was electrocuted by about 13,800 volts. The doctors say, it's likely the first hit stopped my heart, and the second one started it, before I was pulled like a lifeless corpse to safety. I remember experiencing the darkest dark and the most silent silence. I ceased to care that I was dying. Time seemed to change, it could have been hours it seemed. It was only about 30 seconds. I felt as though I was floating and floated towards something that I eventually realized was my body and reality. Upon joining with whatever it was I was floating towards, I became self-aware in my body and heard the electricity making horrible noises and knew I was in danger. From there it was a horribly painful experience, where I lost most of my toes due to tissue death, and had severe electrical burns on all 4 limbs. More surgeries than I care to count, and seeing the round bone ends of my toes that were freshly amputated still haunts me a little. My girlfriend is anaphylactic, and it is triggered by a chemical called salicylate, found in pretty much every food. When she was in high school she had her first big reaction, and the school nurses refused to administer her EpiPen, adrenaline shot, until the ambulance got there. Now obviously, having an anaphylactic reaction doesn't give you a lot of waiting time, so by the time the ambulance got to her school she was in pretty bad shape and barely conscious. The paramedics immediately administered one of her EpiPens, called the nurses ducking twats, and loaded her into the ambulance as her mother arrived. She continued to fade, so they gave her a direct injection of adrenaline this time, still nothing. They give her a second direct injection of adrenaline and this time it hits her about 30 seconds later all at once, and her heart fails. She stops breathing, no pulse, nothing. Dead to the world. For about 2 minutes and 46 seconds she was clinically dead. And the scariest thing is, she saw nothing. She tells me that when you are losing consciousness you can't tell the difference between waves of drowsiness and when your body actually shuts down. All she saw was the darkness of her eyelids, and it felt like going into an extremely calm sleep where she couldn't hear or feel anything, and she didn't mind it. All despite the fact her mother and the paramedics were screaming at her to keep her eyes open, and the ambulance was flying towards the hospital. She miraculously just came back to life almost 3 minutes later, as they were giving her chest compressions, and the cardiologist that assessed her later stated that all the adrenaline in her body was enough to not only stop her heart, but to also restart it with a little help from the paramedic pumping it around. But still to this day, she can't differentiate falling asleep after a long day, and dying. I was dead for a very short period of time, like 30 seconds to a minute. There's a big misconception about it. It's not like sleeping at all. I'll try to explain. There's always a sort of white noise in the back of my mind. It quiets down when I sleep but it's still there. I never noticed it before I died, but I do now. I don't want to romanticize death, but when I was out, it was like this perfect nothingness. And nothingness is so hard to imagine normally, but once you experience it, and they bring you back, part of you wishes you could have stayed. There's no positive feelings there, obviously, but it takes away everything bad too. All your stress, the nightmares, the troubles. All gone. Just nothing exists. It's beautiful in a way. I'm not suicidal at all, and hope to live the rest of a long and happy life. But I'm very much looking forward to a lack of consciousness when I do eventually pass again, and I can honestly say I don't fear death anymore. Something much different than what people are talking about here. They all said, if you paraphrase, that it feels as if you're passing out. Someone compared it to ODing on whippets, nitrous oxide, a feeling of your conscience slowly getting focused into one point in the exact middle of your head, while your limbs lose feeling in a tingling, pleasant way and then you lose consciousness. One girl said that when she came back into conscience she was hallucinating because she had no idea what was going on, and that she started dreaming of something safe, like for example, her mother hugging her in a warm bed. Former coworker of mine died during heart surgery. I think she was out for 90 seconds or close to it. She wasn't religious or anything. She said that she remembered being in the room and seeing her dead uncle and cousin standing at the far end of the room watching everything going on.